Hi, Rohit. Hey, we're going to let everyone come in. We'll give them a couple minutes here. Looks like it's only you and I.
Yeah, sure, Tim.
Yep. Okay, guys, we're getting people starting to come in, so we're going to wait about 1 more minute, and we'll get started. Okay, so let's just get started. We got the fairly light attendance, but we can get started to see if we get any more joining here quickly. So this is the April 24th meeting for the ORAN integration team. We have on the agenda review and approve some previous minutes. We have some general information or some information on some future meetings I need to pass on to you to make sure that you're aware of, and also see if I can get a host. Then we go into some objectives and identifying user stories. I think we're at right now is we're at the point where I think we got our objectives down, at least what we think that we can do. And now we need to identify some user stories that go with those objectives. And then we're going to spend the last half of the meeting discussing the freight cluster use case. Um, is there any changes or additions to the agenda that people feel? Okay, I don't see any. So let's just get started. The first item is to again approve previous minutes of the minutes of the previous meeting. So this is April 17th. Uh, we went through and of course talked about these topics and took these notes. Um, does anyone object to approving these minutes? Okay, I'm not hearing any. I'm gonna mark them approved. Okay. The next one is talking about uh, the future meetings. So again, next Wednesday, people are at the O&E Summit, as well as DTNF and NEPIO. So we're canceling that. Then Seger's coming in and is able to host. I'm going to be out, by the way. All this is because I'm going to be out through at least the 20th of May, and then there's Memorial Day weekend passes on to that. But so I won't be back until the May 20, whatever it is, 29th. And so Sagar has said that he'll host the May 8th and 22nd. I don't have a host for May 15th, and I haven't been able to find one. So what we'll do is, if I don't, if you could just let me know on Slack, or if you want to volunteer now, that'd be great. But if you're able to host that meeting, at least let me know on Slack. If not, if I don't have anyone by the end of the week, then I'll go ahead and cancel the May 15th meeting. Okay? Is that any questions on that? The other meeting that we have that's due to be canceled is the June 12th because ORAN session and a lot of our attendees will be there. Okay. All right. So let's go into talking about the objectives and user stories. If you remember, last week we started talking about objectives, and we talked about these particular things of what we wanted to see around the SMO and the OCloud functions, around NF configuration using the O1, and around service assurance and observation frameworks that are there. And we had these 3 or 4 things that we wanted to do with this. We also had some input for the NF orchestration that we wanted to try to do around, the inventory aspects of it, right? So, and when to trigger that. So there's some R4 enhancements that they're looking for there. So now, based upon this information here, we need to be able to look at and say, well, if I want to see a POC, or I want to see all the deployments, I want to see, all this stuff, what are some of the use cases that we are going to identify in order to fulfill those objectives? That makes sense. And so I'm looking for candidate use cases around OCloud management itself, OCloud cluster management, and deployments on the NFO, deployments via the NFO, right? And we might have some additional ones as well, right? So, guys, I'm looking for some input here. We've got about maybe about 20 minutes that we can spend on this. If you guys can give me some good use case, just identifying use case. We don't have to get into what they would be. That's when we're going to start fleshing them out. But we're trying to identify some candidate use cases for the next release, right? So, does anyone got some ideas, or I hear only crickets? All right. Okay. So what I can do then is I'll take a task of seeding this, unless someone objects to this, right? But what I can do is I can go through all these I want tos, right? And create and seed an initial set of use cases that can be identified. And that way we can, when we come back, we can have a discussion on the use cases. Maybe that will help speed the discussion. How do we want to proceed? How do you guys want to do this? I guess I should have. Am I
Well,
speaking on mute? Go
so
ahead.
this is a big topic, like, I mean, what aspects of workload man? I mean, of course, inventory management, you have software management, you have FMPM.
Oh, no,
There are
no,
many
but
use
but
cases.
we're scoping them down to what we want to see, right? So you start with this, and you say, what are the use cases? So you take the first one. You say we said that we want to take a proof of concept, right? Where between the SMO and the IMS, where we can exchange and maintain inventory. Okay, so we're going to have a set of inventory that deals with this, right? And so we got cloud management for inventory. What are some use cases that we want to see on inventory? You see what I'm getting at, Robbie?
Mm-hmm. No, I was just thinking this again, some of these APIs, I'm not sure if they're all kind of going to be the Nephew way where you're doing it intent based and so on. So basically, you're assuming that okay, an IMS is you have a running IMS, and then you're querying the IMS using the O2 IMS, say inventory APIs to get the inventory information and so on. So but I'm sort of saying is that it may not be going to the API server and then with the notion of an IMS operator and so on. So I mean, the architecture, I'm just looking at more from an architectural perspective, how this inventory information is managed from the FOCOM perspective, assuming the FOCOM is, it's another controller, but IMS, how is IMS implementation here? So I'm seeing it from that perspective.
Yeah. So the question would be, let's talk about inventory, because I think that was one that everyone wanted to do in Release 4, right? So the question would be, like, from a standpoint of IMS, right? Would we want to be able to provide OCloud inventory and to FOCOM, right? Right?
Yeah, now you're talking about R4.
Yes, R4. This is all R4 guys, right? So we're going to provide OCloud inventory to FOCOM for I think you have existing, right? For existing clusters, right?
Existing clusters and what shall we call it? Free resources or not yet allocated resources.
For unallocated, is it existing or unallocated resources? And is that different than
Like
cluster?
existing, yeah, no, yeah. Also, like the resources that is not used in a cluster yet.
Okay,
The first
we'll
one
call
is
okay.
unallocated.
Oh, there's
Unused.
two separate. Okay, so
You can take that as
existing
clusters. Yeah.
and
Available.
for
And the resources not allocated to a cluster.
I'm going to just say unallocated, right? For clusters that are not allocated,
No.
right?
Resources that are not allocated. So it's like more.
Yep. I got you. Yeah. Right. For resources that are not allocated, right? What else?
So along with the inventory, I think you also have the cluster templates, right? There's a list of cluster templates.
Yeah.
Provide what? Cloud inventory for cluster templates. Yep, good point.
Yeah.
Yep, for cluster templates. And we can work on these and make them a little bit generic. But I just wanted to see what we got here. This is brainstorm. Anything else that you want to provide in the inventory?
So for the first one, can we make use of the existing implementation in OSC for inventory management?
Existing, what? I'm sorry, say that again, Bob.
There is an existing, I think there is an implementation of O2IMS API in OSC, right? For inventory.
I haven't seen that one, Bala. So you said that one is exposing the DMS resources then according to the specification, or we can use that one. Yeah. For the second bullet, those like the nodes and sites and so they are not yet in the specification. So there we need to decide on whether we need to do something pre-standard or we need to really make sure that this is like prioritized in ORAN.
Yeah, I think so. I think if we do it, then probably we should do it in a way that it can be standardized in ORAN.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we shall follow this. We can follow the same pattern, I think.
Yeah.
What about the overall OCloud registration use case? I mean, we have it in R3, but I think it needs to be updated here, and then like as a part of that you trigger discovery of existing clusters and so on. So we can, I don't know, you can mention the OCloud IMS registration use case.
Tim, I think you are muted.
Yeah, Tim, we cannot hear you if you are talking.
Sorry, guys, I got pulled away.
Okay.
My bad. So I'm sorry. What do you want me to put on this now?
Yeah, we said like on an umbrella above all these ones, we have the OCloud registration use case.
Yeah.
That will trigger FOCOM to query up all this inventory information. Then.
Okay. So up in here, we have one that we want to put for O2 IMS, right?
Mm.
And we want it to be, I thought we were doing OCloud registration for release 3.
Yeah, but that one is not complete in release 3, right? Unless you have these inventory APIs, FOCOM cannot do everything it should do.
Okay, so what do you want to do with OCloud registration?
There you then automatically should use these APIs to trigger then discovery of existing clusters and discovery of resources
Okay.
using those inventory. Mm.
All right, so during OCloud registration, right?
Mm.
What you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to get the wording down. Provide what?
A discovery of existing clusters, resources, and templates.
Clusters, resources, and you want to do that during registration?
That's at least my thinking. I mean, so far what you have seen there is clusters for sure. I think resources are there also. Template
Okay.
is so new, right? So it's not yet in the use cases, but I think it will be there too.
All right. So cluster
And cluster templates.
Cluster templates. Sorry. All right. So you're saying, okay, when I do an OCloud registration, we also want to, within that use case, then provide the discovery of the cluster templates as part of the inventory, right?
Yeah.
Part of as inventory. I'm going to just say as inventory. Okay. Now what you're saying that then we also have use cases where we would provide the OCloud inventory to FOCOM for existing clusters, but we're doing that as part of this other one. Is this probably for modification?
No, this is more of a sub-use case, right? Because depending on, you are right. It's a good question whether this is as use cases in themselves. Yeah, these are more APIs that are needed in order to do the overall.
Okay. All right. Well, we can keep that then. I mean, again, we'll vet these over again. So
decide whether they are separate or if we shall treat them as a part of this OCloud registration.
And then how about providing updates when inventory changes to FOCOM when inventory changes, right?
So there we have the subscription mechanisms that
yeah, you're going to have to subscribe to that. That's right.
Yeah. But that is part of that use case. So subscription to notifications and sending notification.
And there is a bigger topic of software management too, right? I mean, I'm not sure. I don't think.
Yeah, that is a valid thing. And I don't even know really that one. We have discussed it internally. We don't really know what ORAN wants to make with that software management anymore. Because clearly, I think, or we think that clusters and cluster upgrade, I mean, like workload cluster upgrade, that is a part of more of the provisioning use case. I mean, there you have the cluster template mechanisms. While this software upgrade, we thought that is more like if that is more of the IMS software, or
so let's go back. Let's go back to the objective. Again, I don't mind adding an objective, but I want to see, right? So here we're working on this objective here, right? I want to see a POC where the FOCOM SMO function and the IMS OCloud function exchange and maintain inventory. Right? That's what we were kind of working on. We might have a different POC. Was there a POC that you're thinking about? Is it Ravi or Bala or who was referencing the software management?
Yeah, no, software management is, I was saying, because, what you do as a day zero cluster template, but then, as you you might provision the cluster, but then you may want to modify that. I don't know whether you do it to modify the cluster template itself, or you could upgrade the software in a cluster by adding, say, basically patching or upgrading the firmware versions or device plugins or CNIs or whatnot, right? So
Yeah.
it was a whole thing. I don't know how many use cases.
Robbie, wouldn't you still see that as a part of the provisioning use case now? Then, if we have AutoIMS provisioning there for deploying clusters, wouldn't that also be where you also upgrade cluster and software in the clusters?
You mean the day zero provisioning of the cluster?
Yeah, and like basically even day N. I mean, if you talk about the cluster, reconfiguration of the cluster and upgrades of the cluster or installing additional
But isn't it gonna,
infrastructure resources in the cluster, that I think is like provisioning.
hey, Alok? Yeah,
Yep.
that's, I need to go back on Alec. When we talk about cluster templates, right? If I modify the recipe or even the capability of a cluster template, that's a new template, isn't it? Are we revisioning templates? I call something foo revision 4, right?
Yeah, but that will be internal to OCloud. When you say revision of a template, you mean the template artifact in an OCloud.
Yeah, well, the behavior of what the template's going to do. And I upgrade the software, it changes the
I think
changes either the recipe or the capability of it.
How it has to be updated and or a new, I wouldn't say updated, but creation of a new cluster template, I think that's not today at least, not an ORAN use case, right? But exposure of what all capabilities and capacity it holds is part of the ORAN or the, because SMO has to have an understanding before making a selection. So maybe cluster template management is not part of this objective, but that is covered in the inventory discussion that you were having before. Because
Well, this is
Hmm.
so if I get this correctly, then Ravi, is you're asking for some type of POC for the lifecycle management of a cluster template.
Yeah, again, depends on the granularity of what is covered in the cluster template. I mean, if you want to upgrade it to another version of update the kernel itself, or want to patch the worker node for certain security updates. I think there are many aspects. So okay,
Yeah,
depends
but
upon
Ravi, that will not triggered by the SMO, is it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't know exactly what if it depends on the visibility at the SMO level. If it is something,
I think
the granularity of information there. So
the classic, one of the other example of day 2 is adding a node to a cluster, right? Typical cluster lifecycle management. So if you want to add a node to a cluster, how does it look like in our method? So I think probably that is probably the cluster lifecycle management. We can do it as a part
once you support the parameterization, you can actually provide that as an input from the SMO, right? Like I need to now have, let's say, 4 worker nodes rather than 3, and then there will be a request to update a cluster.
So are we asking to scale a cluster? Is that what we're doing? We're adding
general cluster lifecycle management using our method.
Okay. All right. So we're not saying that the cluster template's something, right? It's the lifecycle management of a cluster.
Yeah.
But even that, I think, is captured as part of cluster template, right? Template will have the sizing of the cluster aspects and those management things too, right?
Not really.
No?
If you are extending a cluster like the scenario which Bala was quoting, you may not need to update the cluster template. You just provide a user input saying, I need to have 4 worker nodes rather than 3, and I'll still reuse the same cluster template for that.
Oh, this would be like those contextualized parameters that you could pass.
Yeah, exactly. So with the
Okay,
with
got
the
it.
assumption that the cluster template supports the parameterization.
The question I ask is that if this is indeed the case, is this something you want to see in release 4, in the next release? Are we ready to do something like this?
I think it's a natural extension of what
Okay.
we do in release 3, right?
Okay, so let's keep it there for a second, right?
Yeah.
And let's go back, and I want to finish this first one because we'll go through each one of these, right? This is what I was trying to get to do. All right, and so the question is that based upon those use cases that we've identified, right? Is there anything else that we would need that we'd want to see in a POC to show the IMS exchange and maintenance of inventory?
So in 1.2, you would need to also have a use case for doing cluster update then.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I'm trying to get back to 1.1 to making sure.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Anders, you got your hand raised?
I was thinking about cluster update as well, but it's in the context of switching to another template.
All right, but that's in here, right?
That's still in there.
Okay,
Okay.
let's hold that for a second, right? I'm trying to get the inventory right. So we want to make inventory a feature in R4. We said that we want a POC where we can show the interaction of the IMS OCloud and the SMO to exchange and maintain inventory. We said this POC can be realized by during the OCloud registration, we provide discovery of clusters, resources, and cluster templates as inventory. During the registration, and then we provide them, these sub use cases for it, right? And then on the O2 IMS, we provide updates when inventory changes, which would provide the subscription and notification support for it. Get rid of this piece down here. All right, and so the question would be: is this sufficient to meet that objective for that POC that you guys are looking? Or is it at least a good start? All right, I'm not hearing
I was
anything.
thinking of one thing. I don't know if included here. DMS endpoints.
Ah, good point. Good point. It comes out of the O2 IMS. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Somehow
that's
we
part
need
of the
to
discovery
learn.
of clusters, right? And if part of a cluster discovery, you get DMS endpoints. I was assuming.
Yeah,
So
could be.
yeah, so I
Okay.
had the same made a comment last time also, right? When Ravi, you were showing some sequence flows about different API requests, right? Coming from the ProCom to the IMS. And one of those was, okay, give me the list of DMS endpoints. Then I went back and searched for the corresponding use case. Do we have it in the ORAN use case specification? But I didn't find any. Do we have such? Because
There's a DMS object, so you can do a general get. There's a service operation for a general get on an object, right? If you look at it, look up the DMS object on there in the IMS spec. It's a general.
Yeah, again, those are implementations coming from OSC. So I'm assuming they are somehow
which is not fully ORAN thing, right? I mean, they are kind of implementing some parts of the ORAN spec, but there are some deltas which exist today in the specifications.
Yeah. And also
that
the
can be
thing was
covered by bullet 1 there. So bullet 1, existing clusters. Like we say, and DMS endpoints or slash DMS endpoints or something. It's I think that is at least depends on the profile. But if we focus here on the AutoDMS Kubernetes profile, then it's a 1-to-1 there.
Yeah, and that particular the sequence diagram, I mean, it was under the assumption that you have no inventory information, so you're basically getting everything from IMS, so it was triggered from that. So I'm not sure if it's just again a pre-standard way of API definition, but yeah, that was more from an OSCV.
Okay, but let's just put it this way, guys. For this particular piece, do we want to provide information about the DMS endpoints as part of the inventory for release 4 as part of this proof of concept?
When you say DMS endpoint, you're talking about kube config and the credentials, things like that?
Right now, there's a big discussion with the security team of how you provide credentials. Going to step away from that because we're talking about use cases.
Yeah.
But when we talk about a DMS endpoint, it is at least, how do I use this to get to this cluster if you're going to manage this cluster?
It is part of the inventory specs, and it is also part of the reference implementation.
Yes. Yes.
So
the
I think
thing is, if you do GitOps, I was saying if you do GitOps, then you probably are looking at the downstream repos, right? You're not looking at a kubeconfig, of course, but then in a few way, you probably are not invoking your API.
No. I mean, the thing is, the inventory API of ORAN, at least which is in stage 3, it is completely agnostic of whether we do GitOps or not. So it essentially tells me, give me the list of deployment managers, which is nothing but give me the list of clusters. And then for each of those things that you get out of those, you can say, for this particular clusters, give me all the details. And then when they say that, as a part of that, you get everything about that particular cluster, the API endpoint, the kube config. I mean, there are some opinionated things in the reference one. If you can see, basically you can provide the credentials, certificate, the kube config file, etc. So using that, so that is a part of a discovery process from the FOCOM side. And then it stores those things in its inventory, and the DMS of NFO is going to use that to deploy the workloads. So because if you see DMS specification itself is purely KH profile, right?
So what I hear is you're saying these ought to be types of resources that we return in the file, right? DMS endpoint. All right.
Yeah.
So let's just leave it at that point where we have this at this point for this particular one, right? And this covers this particular POC, right? And let me do it this way.
Can you also include a point on my question was on if clouds are using certain repositories, how do you discover those repositories? I mean, because
if cloud is hang on. If cloud is using repositories, why would anyone want to discover those repositories?
No, if you were basically what you're doing when you're doing your package, when you're creating a package variants and all, you're taking something from upstream and writing into the downstream repos, and then you're assuming your GitOps will start kicking at that point. So those repos are owned by the clouds, right?
Yeah, but they should not be exposed to FOCOM. Those repositories are like, in that case, if you have repository mechanism in IMS, FOCOM would not see them as repositories. It's like there it would still be translated to like a target site and a target DMS endpoint over to IMS, right? So then internally in IMS, you would need then to map that to which repository that is representing that cluster.
So you're saying that it should be purely IMS APIs. It should be an API.
Yeah. I mean, and even there,
a GitOps mechanism, right?
That's what even there, I mean, the deployment part, that is purely about these DMS endpoints, right? Yeah. Once FOCOM has retrieved the DMS endpoint, then it's actually the role of FOCOM to model this as a repository on the FOCOM side. So I would even argue that the workload repositories, you might not even need them on the IMS side, because FOCOM will have them. And if a FOCOM is Nephew based, there you put those repos there and put the packages there. And then you use the O2IMS Kubernetes API directly then on the workload cluster. So you don't go through the IMS Nephew cluster.
Yeah, because the current NF orchestration, the way we are doing, it's assuming that it's going the Nephew way, so
right.
that needs to be understood. We are assuming that the NFO is I mean, it's basically doing a package variant and have an information on the downstream cluster. So
and you have and you have this. I mean, in FO so far, everything has been collapsed, right? But now we have a split here of like FOCOM NFO part and an IMS part.
Yeah. All right. So what I'm going to do,
those will be probably the enhancements you have to consider for, I mean, the extensions for NF orchestration regarding downstream repos and stuff.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
All right, guys. So what I'm going to do is, because we've got another item, so we're spending a little bit of time on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this right now. Again, if people want to add to these objectives, right, and or start filling out, what I'm doing is I'm going by objective, start filling out some, identifying some use cases that you want to see, you're more than welcome to, the slides are there, right? So you're more than welcome to do that. If not, next time we have a session like this, we'll just keep going through each one of these objectives, realizing that we're trying to do this for release 4, and we want to make sure that, again, what we'll do is come back through and say, okay, that's too much stuff. What do you want to try to get actually start to fill out the use cases for? Okay. So right now we're still brainstorming. So I'm perfectly fine, adding pieces because we may forget stuff. But eventually we'll get to the point where we're saying, okay, that's a big enough. The rest of these will go into backlog and we'll treat them as release 5 or whatever. Right? We got enough for release 4. Okay. So the next item is talking about the deployment automation components. So we did some work yesterday on this use case to where we think we're done with the IMS. And so, Stefan, do you want to take over and start talking about some of the FOCOM pieces? And maybe if you were able to talk to the security guys, people might want to be interested in knowing how we're going to get credentials. So.
Shall we?
So one more thing, Stephen and Tim, if I can request, can you please give the summary of yesterday's meeting, the design meeting that you guys have for the guys who missed? Just a couple of lines of summary.
I was thinking about that also. We can, exactly this. We have it a bit summarized here. So in yesterday's meeting, then we had a few topics that we wanted to discuss there. So the first one then was around like the API exposure. We had so far before concluded that we had this, KRM CRD based approach with a cluster request CR that will be used as proposed as the resource that we will standardize then in ORAN. But we were open so far about like how the API would look like. And what we said yesterday that like in our Nephew implementation for release 3, we say that let's use the Kubernetes API server. We don't invent anything else on top there, like a shim layer or another REST API. We use the Kubernetes API server. It will expose this custom resource. So it will expose the cluster request resource. And then we should also then, for release 3, perform an analysis in detail on this RESTful interface that is still exposed via the Kubernetes API server. What does it look like? What are the like tweaks and things there that are like a bit specific just because we are using the Kubernetes API server? And are there any gaps or anything there that we don't think should be kept for long term? Then we could potentially then update that in a more generic RESTful interface that is not dependent on the Kubernetes API server in release 4. but we do this in a phased approach then. And then not written down here then, but in parallel there, we should take that discussion also in ORAN. And once we have done this deeper analysis on, okay, how is the interface actually then going to look like? And then we can have that sync in ORAN whether this is good enough or if we really need to define something that look different. It's not that we are saying necessarily that like FOCOM will use everything provided by the Kubernetes API server, but we say here that that will be the implementation on the IMS side, and we need to identify which specific API requests exposed and supported by the Kubernetes API server that would be necessary for this use case. So that was the first decision, like a phasing there. The other decision we talked about was related to instance-specific input, because we had discussed that also. And there we said that we think that like specialization when it comes to each cluster instance is actually not there today in R1, R2. You have the functionality there with like the VLAN allocation and IPAM allocation that is supported already. So then we thought that we can stay on that level for R3 and then not introduce any specialized or instance-specific parameter input in this time frame. And okay, we say unless it is needed. Yeah, we don't see that need now then for R3. So then again, then that potentially we could say that, at least that was my thought or understanding from what we said yesterday, that like for now we can say that we go with R3 without those specialized parameters, and then we can still introduce that in R4.
So those were the two primary decisions that we made yesterday. And then there was this action item that we had taken up. Go ahead.
So the action, the thing we also discussed then was once you have successfully deployed a new workload cluster, then how do you expose the credentials to authenticate towards this cluster and up to FOCOM NFO? And there we said, we started to talk about the options and thought about if we should have like a phased approach here also then for R3. But then we concluded that we need to take that discussion with the security SIG group and see what they say and have that as a joint discussion. So there we got an action item at, is it written like there is, in the face-to-face meetings next week then, Alexis and Wim took that action item to sync with the security SIG people then. And then we need to see what they say, and then we shall probably come up with a proposal there also for what to do in R3 and what to do in R4. But I think that is on the IMS side then for R3. This security credential thing is still the one that is still open then, that we need to sort out and decide on. Otherwise, I think we have kind of agreed on the ambition level on the IMS side. Then I have been looking, as a part of the use case, I have been looking into alternatives how to do the FOCOM side as well. But we said yesterday that let's wait with that then. We probably will have more of these breakout sessions after next week's face-to-face. And then we can take the agreement with the security SIG into account and then discuss more further on than on how the FOCOM side and should be implemented.
So on the point to Stephen, basically the FOCOM will just mention the templates, two templates coordinates to the OCloud, and that everything else is part of the template definition inside OCloud, right?
So you said the only thing in this custom resource node and that will be included is the cluster template reference, the ref to the cluster template in the OCloud IMS side, and a reference to the target site.
Yeah.
So the site ID needs to be referred.
Okay, I think that's good. Probably we can start simple like that,
Exactly.
and we can learn lessons along the way.
That's the thinking. Yes.
Cool. Makes sense. Thanks, Steve.
All right, any other questions on the review?
Can you share the recording, please? So that
It's on me. I will.
No, it's not on you. We had problems yesterday with even the WebEx stuff follow. So they weren't able. We used Red Hat's personal thing, so there's no recording, guys. Sorry.
So my action is to I think I can take the action to update the user story as I have done previously with these conclusions. And then still we need to wait for the credential security part and to be concluded, and then we can bring that in also then in the user story.
Yep. Is there something that you want to show on your? So first of all, the question I had out, by the way, is we also have some additional stories. Can we, if we're at the point now where we understand the IMF, can we also fill out or complete these other user stories, at least the delete? Or are these going to be backlogged to 4, to release 4?
Delete, we need to decide upon. I think OCloud registration, we need some parts of it, as we said, and we don't have all these discovery mechanisms. But OCloud registration in FOCOM, that user story will be needed. There it's more about how to provide the endpoint and the credentials for the IMS cluster, for instance. So now then we say that we will use the Kubernetes API server there. That is a good thing then. So now we know that there we need to provide a kubeconfig file in some way as a part of a registration user story. So I think that one we need to do.
Is there a way that we can get this start working on getting this updated, Stefan?
Yeah, I can take a look at it. I think it would be good perhaps to. I was just thinking a little loud here. As I said, and I have already in the cluster creation user story, I have also included these alternatives for FOCOM, and there actually I have a piece there about like the dependency towards this OCloud registration user story. So I wonder there, perhaps we should look at those FOCOM implementation alternatives first, and then there we will see then what we really need, so that everyone agrees on what is needed in terms of OCloud registration. And then when we have that agreed, then I can take this user story then and update.
All right, so that makes sense. All right, so did you want to do any reviewing of the FOCOM side?
Yeah, I think we need a breakout session then after next week for the FOCOM side.
Yeah, so you don't want to do that during this meeting, though. Is that accurate?
No, exactly. I think that takes an hour or so in itself. So yeah.
All right. So this is I'm just trying to get the.
And then delete OCloud cluster. I don't know if it is critical. Perhaps it is. I mean, if we say we shall do demos and POCs and so on, that you create something you want to remove it. Otherwise, perhaps resource-wise, we could just also wait with it until R4. Depends.
Well, so yeah, so we're going to be doing. So the question is, how do you clean up, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because we don't have that user story today, right? In R1, R2, we didn't have delete, and I understood if from some previous discussions there were some problems there with removing a package deployment, or I don't know if those has been resolved. Do you remember? Because I just remember I heard that in one meeting a while ago.
I don't know. Does anyone know? Either way, we're going to need some mechanism for this, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
all right, but you need a breakout session then for the FOCOM side, then is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask Segar, or I'm probably going to have to ask Segar. Action item, Tim to ask Segar for a breakout session.
Yeah.
And we'll start that week of 5-6 is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Then I see now, Seishu, you are online. I reached out to you before related to this user story, and I have not talked to you because we have had all these discussions around the O2IMS exposure and so on. But once I have done the updates that I say I will do, I can ping you, and then you can take a look now. Then, so we need to align this with the OSC.
By the way, you will be there for the ONES, right? You'll be there in the ONES session. Next week you'll be there in San Jose?
No, I will not be there myself. We have others going, but I will not be there.
Oh, okay. Because I'll be there. I thought maybe we can meet in person to discuss much more.
Exactly. No,
yeah.
Unfortunately, not this time.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, so because Seishu, we're at the point where we have the IMS set on the crate cluster, but we're now in the FOCOM space, but we want to make sure that you're bought into what we're trying to do in the FOCOM area, right? So,
we are working on it. One problem we are facing is the environment. I even raised this to talk tomorrow also. I raised it to David Kenzie too. And even tomorrow's meeting, I'm going to discuss that. Even next week, that will be one of the risks which I see for the HDDs of both ORAN SC as well as the NFIO part. Having said that, we are working in silos right now. I mean, silos as in we are making the independent progression on each of the stages. And we are trying to set up the OA lab, which Sagar has already got procured. Once we have that lab ready and up and running, then we should be having some tests to have it. Other than that, everything else is in progress. Everything else is on track. Tim.
Yeah, but you don't know how to create a cluster from FOCOM, right? Is what I'm saying is that you don't have an activity on that at this point.
No, I do have. As I said, I'm using the OSC part right now, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and so you remember, right? We discussed on that. So the cluster which is created by OSC is what I'll use for NFO. That way, I don't be
That's the northbound, right?
Southbound to the FOCOM, right? I will the IMS of the
documentation or the description. I haven't seen anything from OSC so far around cluster lifecycle management. So
no, we don't have a cluster create, but what I'm saying is I'll be creating it manually from the FOCOM side. FOCOM, ORAN and INS, ORAN SC INF already has a cluster creation APIs. So I'm going to use that for time being.
Okay.
Yeah. See, the reason is, again, create cluster as such, there is nothing. But I'm going to use the IMS part, and that is what I'm going to use it for the FOCOM right now for the ORAN SC, the way it's happening. And further, once we have this decision made on the SO to the bottom of it, I'll be able to use that further. Right. Clear?
So when you say cluster creation, you mean more of a cluster registration, or?
No. I mean, registration comes later. I'm saying cluster creation as it. IMS right now has it. ORAN SC IMS has it. Stephen, I'll do one thing. I'll actually send you the documentation of it offline. Okay. So that you can have a look.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, right. Maybe it's good to include that in the minutes somewhere, because I think it's of an interest for other
in this meeting.
Yeah. I myself have not seen the OSC documentation, so maybe it's good to capture it somewhere.
Sure. As I said, I'm using the ORAN SC, so I'll actually give you the details of it. No problem. Alok will be there on the San Jose meeting.
No, I'll not be, unfortunately.
So Seisha, could you do me a favor and put that on the Slack channel where that information can be found?
Slack. Okay, sure. Okay, I'll try to put.
Yeah, that will help me because then what I'll do is I'll then pull it and put it up on,
Okay.
or you could put it up in here. I mean, I don't care, but I would just.
Sure. I'll just tell
put
you
it
the
on-
procedure which I'm following. It may not be sufficing the things which you're looking at, I'm sure, but I'll put a procedure which I'm doing right now, so that everyone will get a clarity. Sure, I'll do it.
Okay, because we gotta come to a harmonization, as you were saying. You've got a certain southbound implementation, probably using Chappie or something like that, and and what we're doing is we're taking that and we actually have some specific CRDs called a cluster claim request that we're going to need to introduce, right? So that's going to be important. Okay.
Agreed. Sure.
All right. Okay. All right. So anything else today? We got 4 minutes left. Anyone else want to say? Okay, guys. Again, have fun in ONES, the ones that are going.
Oh, Tim, you're not with the team?
No, I am on vacation. So they scheduled at the same time I scheduled, a cruise with my wife. So I decided to pick my wife over you guys. What can I say?
No, wise decision. You can't take chances there, right? You can't take chances there for sure.
Yeah. Well, I've been married 40 years. I want to make it 41.
Congratulations.
Thank you. All right. I'll talk to you guys when everyone gets back together again. Later, guys.
Sure.
Have a good time, team. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye.